Okay, well, good afternoon from Madison, Wisconsin, or whatever time, or good morning, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. I'm Addison Nace. I am a second year PhD student here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Um, and I have been planning this conference with my advisor, Marina Moskowitz. Um, and I'm very excited to introduce our two panelists today. First, we have Emily Pop and Leo Hain talking. Um, Emily Pop, um, hers is a fashion and textile artist, costume designer, and performer. Her work is based in the repurposing and altering of found and secondhand materials and coincides and considers the spiritual relationship between the unknown history of secondhand materials and the maker. Emily sees fashion as a tool to support feeling comfortable as your true self, and she enjoys all styles and forms of that expression. She holds a master's degree in fashion and textiles from UW-Madison and a post-baccalaureate in fashion from the School Art of the Institute of Chicago. And Leo Hain is almost 5 years old, and he is now working on making music in guitar band and has some awesome things to show you. And our second presenter will be Suzanne Thompson. So while earning her BA in biology from the University of Texas at Austin, Suzanne Thompson spent a great deal of time in the textile section of the university library. She was glad to find authors who agreed with her assertions that knitting and crochet are artistic media. As years went by, Suzanne taught knitting and crochet locally and nationally, designed patterns for publication in needlework and craft magazines, and wrote 3 books with pattern for crochet appliques. Suzanne's textile art practice began in the mid-1990s. Using her signature technique, textile fusion, she pieces and quilts knitted fabric and embellishes with crochet, buttons, and more. Suzanne still designs crochet patterns and studies crochet's place in Texas culture. And with that, I'll let Emily take it away. Thank you so much.
Hello. Excuse me. Let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Pop. Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for hosting me. Yes, my name is Emily Pop. I use she, her pronouns, and I just got an amazing introduction, so I'm going to reiterate a little bit of that. So this presentation is called The Necessity. Necessity is the mother of collaboration. And I'm going to share with you some experiences and reflections on how caring for my child during this past year of the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted my art practice. And my son Leo will be joining us in a bit for some of his impressions. But first of all, I thought I would just share a little bit with you about my background. As Addison so kindly said, I am a textile artist, performer in fashion and costume designer, and I use secondhand materials and found objects as a medium. My work investigates waste, remnants, and the human and spiritual and historical embodiment which resides within discarded clothing. Again, as Addison said, in 2015, I received a post-baccalaureate at the in fashion design at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And in 2016, I gave birth to my son, Leo Hain. 5 months later, I started graduate school at the University of Madison in the School of Human Ecology and the Textiles and Fashion and Design MFA program. And I graduated in the spring of 2019. At the onset of the pandemic, I was employed as a youth arts educator, costume designer, and costume assistant, and was working at a high-end fashion online retailer maintaining and prepping garments. All of these jobs were either suspended, lost, or reduced as a result of the pandemic. CNN reported in December 2020 that the US economy lost 156,000 jobs, all of which were held by women in that month. In February of this year, the New York Times reported that nearly 1 million mothers have left the workforce. According to both of these analyses, Black women and Latina women have been the most severely impacted by these losses. As we know, this past year has been a time of sacrifice and loss for most everyone in various and multiple ways. It has affected people of different ages, ethnicities, and those with different careers in different ways. And I just want to acknowledge, respect, and honor those losses and sacrifices. I also want to be clear that my intention with this presentation is not meant to be a statement on resilience or romanticization of the toll that these sacrifices have taken on parents, mothers, women, and artists, but as an opportunity to reflect on what this has meant for me, my family, my community, all of you, and the lives, families, and communities of parents and artists who I don't know, also many of you. When I proposed this presentation, I asked the question, how do parents use domestic art practices to continue to create in the home under the constraints of this present condition? But in fact, this question can also be considered more broadly for anyone. In what ways do artists' practices adapt and change with constraints, be they externally imposed, social or societal limitations, or physical and emotional boundaries? For me, this began with a shift in expectations. Obviously, with any new limitation, there has to be a shift in expectations, which can be painful. For me, this included expectations around the scale and the reach of what I was going to be able to create this year. There's Leo working on some dyeing in the kitchen in a bucket. This also created a shift in what I needed to feel a sense of satisfaction. This knee patch, which Leo chose, is one of the first sewing acts I did after the pandemic began. And I found I was able to gain quite a lot of satisfaction from this. Another area in which I had to shift was the path of collaboration. In the past with my colleagues, I haven't always found collaboration to be entirely easy. And I tend to have particular ways I like to do things. Working with Leo, because he's a child and my child, offers me a chance to practice more genuine collaboration. I was speaking about this with my husband, who is a musician and also collaborates with Leo. And he was reflecting that it was a time to relinquish the teacher and know-it-all position and encourage a sense of freedom with the materials for our kid. So now I'm going to invite Leo to come in and we're going to show you 5 or 6 projects that we've made during this time. 1 second. You want to come in, love?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to teach that how to write things.
This is Leo.
Yeah.
Hello. I just showed them this video of us knitting. And now I'm going to show them this picture of, there it is, the fully made scarf that we made the knitting. Did you want to say anything about it?
This is a
Fully made scarf with some,
Yes.
okay, next one.
This is my mentor. It's by new and Carrie and picture love Leo.
This is a project that Leo invented called a measure stretcher. And it's a long piece of fabric that you can be measured your height on. And we have a small video of Leo explaining that for you to watch. Let me know if you can hear it well enough.
Hang in.
Emily, do you want to try playing your video again? Quite a few people can't hear the sound.
Sure, 1 second.
Sure.
I turned up on the whole thing. Just a moment. Oh, here we go. I turned up to 100 on there. Is there any other place I can
I don't think so.
All right. I'm gonna just try playing it for a second, and then if you can tell me, Addison, can you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you can hear it? Hold on 1 second.
Okay, well, I hear a little sound, but it's still pretty choppy.
All right, well, we'll
Oh,
just work with
technology.
that. Well, what do you, Leo, would you like to say anything about it?
Next one.
Oops. All right.
Next one.
Did you want to say anything about the measure stretcher? Let's take a look at this picture, okay? You
This
had,
is the one.
yes, the measure stretcher is a piece of fabric, and here we have your name, right? Anything else you want to say about this parts?
And oh,
That's where in October we measured you there, and that's how tall you were. Great, fantastic. All right, let's see what's next.
handsome, so happy, scratch cat.
Pants sewing. I felt happy, scratchy catty. Leo's pants that we made together. You don't need the audio for this video. There was Leo working on his pants. He did some decorative stitching. There. Yep. Anything you want to say about the pants?
Scratchy cat, so happy.
They're a bit scratchy, apparently. Now, these are some pieces that I really love.
These are some
Leo's
books.
fabric books. Yep, there. You want to just read the names?
So, the one that looks like a fully white piece is called Beard's Mustache.
Mhm.
And then that big one that has the flowers on it is called Stuart Little. And then the one that looks like it has three men is called Black Jack Attack.
Mhm.
And then the one with scissors and hand stuff is Sizzle on the Whizzle. And the one that has superheroes called Pow Pow. And the real one, sunglasses, called Me Stuart Little. And the one that looks like a huge circle is What No Yes.
What? No, yes. We do have a couple videos of Leo talking about this, but maybe I'll just show one so you can get a little bit of a closer look at how, since the audio isn't panning out for us. Let's see.
and then egg.
All right, we can just forget about that kind of technology and show you the actual.
Here is Beard's mustache.
Oh, right. You know what? Hold on, let's just go forward here for a moment.
This is Beard's mustache.
Here we go. This is Beard's mustache. Uh-oh, the video's going.
Beard's mustache. Beard's mustache.
Beard's mustache. Fantastic.
Beard's mustache.
And let's show them one other one.
Beard's mustache. And Stuart Little. And Chippendale's Splash Blackjack Tack.
All right, thank you. We're gonna show them the next one, okay?
And here's Sizzle on the Whistle.
Right. Scissor on the Wizard.
Sizzle on the Whistle.
Right. Just a few more here. Thank you for your understanding about our technology. Next, we want to share with you the black walnut die clothes that we made. These are some clothes, and we went to the backyard and we picked some black walnuts, smashed them up, and cooked them up on the stove.
See?
There they are. They smelled good. Here's Leo's shirt with animal drumming, dyed with black walnut outside. There's the finished product.
Next one.
Dad's pants, walnut dyed. Now, I think this is the last one we have to share with you. This is our puffy paint vintage coat collaboration, still in progress. And Leo had some good things to say about this piece. Would you like to read it, love?
This coat, this is a coat that me and Mom colored. The sun is on. So clouds and glass and pink clothes and tread and pink spots and railroad tracks. Another one I and a sidewalk and some walk.
There you have it. That's the whole show. There's Leo and I. And these are where I got those stats. Thanks so very much for tuning in and listening to our presentation. Leo, did you want to say anything else? Bye-bye, he said.
Hello, peeking in.
All right, thank you.
Peeking in.
Good job, buddy.
Just whip it in.
Thank you so much, Leo and Emily.
They say thank you, Leo.
Okay. Wonderful. And Suzanne, whenever you're ready to start, you can turn on your microphone and video and share your screen.
Okay, thank you. In 2016, I started collecting stories and information about doilies and the people who made them. And the person who put me on that doily path was Mac McKinnon. He was a publisher of a small town newspaper called the Dublin Citizen. He was very young when his parents died, and his grandmother pretty much raised him. She was always making something, and Mac was proud of her abilities. After she died, he kept her crocheted items in a box because he said, I really don't know what else to do with them. Well, there are all kinds of things you can make with doilies. And since I was at the time preparing a textile art exhibit, I started using doilies in my work. This is afternoon, and there's that doily down there under the vase. Here's a vintage table mat as a background to this scene. This piece in the middle here is an antimacassar. They were made to protect upholstered furniture from hair oil, specifically macassar oil, and that's how we get the term antimacassar. And something about yellow and white doilies makes me think of stars and comets. So that's where this comes from. Well, making wall hangings with doilies on them was great fun for me, but I was pretty sure Mr. McKinnon was not going to make wall hangings with his grandmother's needlework. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what he could do with his grandmother's doilies. And the more important question turned out to be, why did he keep them? He kept them, of course, because they reminded him of her and he loved her. She was gone and they were a connection that he had between himself and her and a reminder of how important she was in his life. Mr. McKinnon and other people told me about their crocheted family heirlooms. And obviously, because they knew I would appreciate them, but also it took me a while to realize they really wanted to tell me about their family members, and the doilies were a way to enable that. So when I was finally able to articulate this to myself, it was clear that what we can do with the doily is to tell its story, to tell the story of the person who made it and how that relates to us. I hatched a plan. The doily stories would be part of my textile art exhibit, and the bonus was there would be community involvement. Yay! I contacted Mr. McKinnon and others, interviewed them, took photos of their family heirlooms, and used them to create posters like this one. So Jessie Pearl McKinnon's story became part of the Celebrate Doilies exhibit. Now, while we are on the subject of grandmothers, I'd like to show you Diana Mayfield's doily. She loved to look for free vintage doily patterns online, like this one, and she had just finished crocheting it when her father called from Pennsylvania. He said, Diana, I just put a package in the mail to you. It was something from your grandmother, and I know she would want you to have it. Okay, well, the package arrived, and Diana found this doily inside. There were many more doilies to collect. With the help of a grant from the Summerlee Foundation, I was able to study doilies in the Texas Panhandle. The product of my research would be a traveling panel exhibit of 45 doily-related posters. In my travels, I met Mary Sue Potts, who told me about her grandmother, Oni Martin Burleson, who was born in 1893 in Motley County, Texas, and all of the towns and counties I'll talk about are in Texas. Oni was one of the 11 children in her family who survived to adulthood. She was, quote, the pretty one. So when she was old enough, she got to go to the Seth Ward Academy in Dublin, not in Dublin, in Plainview, Texas. She studied art there and met her future husband. Unfortunately, Oni suffered from terrible arthritis in her knees, and after a few years, she spent most of her days sitting down, but she was not idle. She crocheted, embroidered, sewed, painted china, and everything crafty. Mary Sue speculated that doing needlework was one way Oni could contribute to her family and later to her son's family without having to walk around too much. Mary Sue said that Oni supplied her family with pillow slips galore. And I have to show you this grape trivet that Oni made. Do you all know what's inside those grapes? I can't see the chat. Can anyone put down in the chat and tell me if they know what it means? What's inside those grapes? Any answers? Well, I'll tell you then. Bottle caps. Oh, is that the chat?
Some people did guess right.
Okay, good, good. Bottle caps, that is right. And back home, some friends showed me a similar doily trivet that their grandmother had made, and we were laughing about how when you had a crocheter in the family who used bottle caps, the kids had a lot better chance to get to drink a Coke or a Dr. Pepper. But one of the friends said, yes, that was true, but you had better be very careful taking the caps off of the bottle because you sure didn't want to put a dent in it. Here's the back of Oni's trivet. She finished these grapes beautifully. And also, I think you can see the bottle caps inside there. Grapes were pretty popular among crocheters, maybe because of that fabulous shaded purple crochet thread. But here's a doily by Lucy Robeson Reamer. She was also born in 1893, and she was old enough to remember when the family pulled up stakes in Burnett County down in central Texas and moved hundreds of miles north to claim a ranch in the panhandle of Texas. They arrived on December 31st in the snow in a wagon yard in Pampa. The men and boys slept under the wagon while the women and girls were invited to sleep inside the wagon yard owner's family home. Well, the next day, the Robesons drove through the snow to their ranch, and a cowboy brought them a deer to eat. It was through the generosity of the cowboys that the Robeson family had enough to eat that winter. Lucy thought the world of the cowboys. One of them was particularly cute, and his name was Oscar Reamer. He was from a musical family who often played at ranch dances. When Lucy and Oscar decided to marry, Lucy's father, who was a Church of Christ preacher, said he would bless the marriage if Oscar promised never to take Lucy to a dance. And he never did. Here's a grape doily by my own grandmother, Charles Etta Thompson. My dad was the youngest of her 7 children, and he remembered how she worked all day raising children, cooking, and doing laundry not only for her family, but for other people's families to try and make ends meet during the Depression. He said she still took time every evening to read her Bible lessons, to work a crossword puzzle, and to quilt or crochet. So these are all so pretty. Where do people get patterns for these things? Well, up into the 1940s and 50s, pattern leaflets cost about 10 cents. Thread manufacturers published them to promote their crochet cottons, and so they needed to keep the price reasonable. Early designers advertised in newspapers, asking for 10 to 15 cents in coin for a pattern set. And during wartime, advertisements suggested that doilies could endow with new beauty a neglected table or a not-so-new sideboard. Another wartime ad gave advice for making the most of humble means. Clever hostess knows how much charm a lovely hand-crocheted luncheon set can add to modest surroundings and simple fare. Readers could order the instructions for the pictured luncheon set by sending a stamped, self-addressed envelope to the needlework department of the newspaper, specifying design number 51-2. So aside from the stamps and envelopes required, the pattern was free. I remember seeing the first ad like that and thinking, ooh, I wonder if I could work at the needlework department of the newspaper. But now I know they were probably just mailboxes that the newspapers used to collect the envelopes, and then they mailed the patterns out that were probably provided by thread manufacturers or contest sponsors. Mary Frances Coots of Denton County could not even afford the 10 cents to buy a pattern, so she would study a picture of a doily or a doily that someone had already made to figure out the pattern for herself. She kept samples to remind her of what a pattern looked like. Another way to economize on patterns was what the Kelly family did. Pat Kelly Macchione said that when she was growing up in the 1950s and 60s on the farm in Hale County, if one person crocheted something, their sisters, friends, daughters would crochet it too. The doilies on this slide were made by her mother, Edna Merle Carter Kelly. Pat went on to tell me that everybody crocheted to pass the time. She said we only had 3 television stations. We didn't have cable. We didn't even have a telephone on the farm until I was 16. GTE would have brought in a line for $5,000, but we couldn't afford that, so we used ham radio. I stopped in Shamrock, Texas, in the Texas Panhandle, to visit Jim and Beverly Baker. Jim's family was good at making stuff. His mother, Marie, in this picture here, grew flowers, crocheted, painted china, and painted paintings. Bev said there was nothing her mother-in-law couldn't do. The Bakers used their skills, and as Jim said, that's how they had nice things. Jim also told about his Aunt Audra, a tiny, sweet lady who told the best stories and crocheted the whole time. Aunt Audra said, whenever I go to thinking about things that bother me, I just go crochet and it keeps me from worrying about it. When Horace Calloway got out of the military, he worked with his father in the construction business in Rising Star, Texas. He was the father of 5 daughters. Someone taught Horace how to crochet and he found it very relaxing. His daughter Joy said that sometimes he would run out of thread before he finished crocheting for the day. Since he didn't have a lot of money, he would unravel something he had already finished so he could keep going. And Horace was another one of those people who could look at a doily and figure out how to crochet it without a pattern. The ads we talked about earlier, I found in a newspaper archive in the Portal to Texas History, and I spent hours following leads in those newspapers. I was aware of people advertising doily patterns, but what I was not expecting was the discussion about doily etiquette. Some people had very firm ideas about what you should and should not do with a doily. They even wrote to Emily Post with questions about appropriate doily procedure. A 1920s article listed the essential items for a bride's dowry, including doilies. And 30 years later, a columnist, Erta Haley, wrote that crocheted luncheon sets were a lavish gift for a bridal shower. So a luncheon set varied in the number of doilies. It usually had a large doily for a centerpiece and then smaller doilies for placemats, bread and butter plates, tumblers, dessert plates, and sometimes even salt and pepper shakers. Newspapers also devoted space to social news, like reporting the meetings of women's study clubs and just meetings. In 1943, the Refugio Timely Remarks reported that after their program, tea was served by members of the Women's Club from a lace-laid table with centerpiece of ivy in a crystal globe resting on crocheted doily flanked by white tapers. Doily culture went beyond women's magazines and the women's page in newspapers. Doilies and similar items appeared in what we now call classic radio. Earlier, we talked about antimacassars, so let me introduce you to Johnny Dollar. He is the fabulous freelance insurance investigator with the action-packed expense account. And don't you love in this photo how there's a doily under the telephone? Well, in 1956, Johnny went to Hollywood to investigate a kind of sketchy life insurance situation, which became a murder case. While he was on the job, the police suspected an ex-con named Lonnie Miller. Johnny visited him in jail, and Mr. Miller said, "I have done nearly everything in the book, Mr. Dollar, but I have never killed anyone." So in an aside to the radio audience, Johnny said that Mr. Miller looked about as dangerous as a Victorian antimacassar. In a 1948 episode of The Jack Benny Show, Jack's friend Phil had competed in a snooker tournament. That's Phil down there in the bottom left. He was kind of disappointed that he hadn't won the engraved cuspidor because he said, I already bought a doily for it. In the next week's episode, Jack and his co-star Mary Livingstone were making a list of Oscar-winning actors, and Mary remembered Frederick March and Olivia de Havilland were recent Oscar winners. Jack said, well, Freddie is out of town and Olivia hasn't talked to me since I put too much starch in her doilies. Well, all this talk of doilies in 2 episodes, one after the other, made me think sounds like some kind of inside joke. So off to Google, and I searched the term Jack Benny doilies. One of the hits was a reference to skull doilies. So what in the world is a skull doily? Well, it is Hollywood slang for a toupee. And I'm pretty sure that actors who wore toupees were teased and teased each other about their hair pieces. And this brings us back to the present, where if you search the term skull doily, this is what you'll find. I made one of these doilies, the one called Skullduggery Doily by Catherine White. I met her at a Crochet Guild of America conference a few years ago, and I'm not sure if she still designs doilies, but the reason I'm telling you about her is that we have doily designers among us today. Elizabeth Ann White is a fellow Texan, and one of her innovations in doily making is using fabric glue to attach the different components of the doily designs to each other. So where are doilies headed now? We know we're still designing them, but what's ahead for doilies? Well, doilies have left the top of your furniture and become part of the furniture. At some point, we drove them up the wall. The next stop was the floor. They enjoyed getting out in the garden. And then they went big and high in art installations as showpieces on walls. And then they left home altogether and can be seen riding behind SUVs as spare tire cozies. Doilies have entered the art world. Textile artists, ceramicists, photographers, collage artists, and others use doilies in their works. And will be putting up some slideshow notes on my website, which will have some of their websites for you to look at when you have a moment. Doilies are a bit magical because they can be in at least 2 places at one time. They can be on your bedside table or on the back of your Jeep, and they can be enjoyed and studied by every person with internet access in the crowdsourced collection of the Center for Knit and Crochet. If you attended Monday's session called Learning from Collections, you will have already heard about the Center for Knit and Crochet from Jennifer Lindsay, CKC's president. She talked about CKC's collections as well as how to contribute to the online crowdsourced archive. Her talk was recorded in case you missed it, so I'm just going to summarize. CKC's mission is to preserve and promote the art, craft, and scholarship of knitting, crochet, and related crafts. One of the ways we do that is by hosting 2 online collections. One draws from museums and libraries all over the United States through the Digital Public Library Association. The other is a crowdsourced collection, and that means anyone with a knitted, crocheted, or related treasure may upload photographs of it with supporting information. And as long as we have the internet, your doilies will be there for scholars and enthusiasts to learn from and enjoy. And all this while they stay at home, in a box maybe. CKC's crowdsourced collection has some doilies, but it needs more. And doilies cannot upload themselves, so it's up to us. And when we have uploaded stories and photos of our doilies, antimacassars, bedspreads, tablecloths, sweaters, hats, gloves, socks, handbags, toys, and afghans, and everything else knitted and crocheted, that will truly be a worthy accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I'm going to open up the session to questions for both of our presenters, and there are already a few coming in. First, for Emily, there is a question. Does Leo want to continue collaborating after the pandemic eases up?
Do you want to? You think they'll keep wanting to make art projects with me and Dad?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Is,
Hopefully, with more people than just us.
Wonderful. And then within the questions, except this is more of a comment for Suzanne, Beverly Gordon says, I love this exploration. I wrote an article called The Push and Pull of the Doily, Revered, Reviled, and Reconceived, which was published in Piecework in 2018. It was an overview of attitudes and practices with doilies, so you might be interested in checking that out. And there's another question in the chat from Catherine Braun, excuse me. What a great presentation. I have two questions for Suzanne. One, how did you gain access to your interview participants? Two, how do you see mandalas fitting into doily discourse?
A lot of people I just knew, they knew I was a crocheter, so they came to me. And then I kind of, by word of mouth, I came across other people. And then when I went to museums, I just called ahead and said, do you have doilies? And can I come and talk to you about them? So I was pretty bold because the worst they could do was tell me no. And about mandalas, I think doilies are mandalas. And they are the mandalas of the 1940s and 50s. And I sometimes look at them and I think, what was the personality of this crocheter that made her or him choose this particular pattern to make? And so I speculate about that a lot.
We still have we have like 15 minutes if anyone else wants to keep asking questions. I do have a question for Emily and Leo, is how do you find your inspiration for your projects together? Or
Well, Leo said he got the idea for the measure stretcher from his friend Ziggy, who had one apparently.
it was pink.
But hers was pink. I think the black walnuts gave me the inspiration for making themselves. I don't know. It's a good question. Just pops in, I guess. The books, though, how did you get the idea for those books? Because that was Leo's idea.
For my Fabricat book.
What was your Fabricat book?
Well, I was thinking along one day, and I was in Fabricat store, and I thought about making a book about it. So I told him to make
Okay.
Fabricat book.
So he was in my studio area, which has a lot of fabric, and he just had the idea to make some fabric books. Great idea, honey.
Martha Pop also asks, what will you do next, Leo?
That's his grandma.
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna do next?
I don't know.
Remains to be seen. He doesn't know. Thanks for asking.
Okay, Emily, you talked about the loss of jobs and opportunities for women, mothers, and artists. Have you viewed your experience as a loss of identity or a shift? Do you feel positive about the way your work has been forced to change? This is from Jennifer Bastian.
That's a lot of stuff. I think yes. Just a second. I think yes to everything. So yes, it has been hard on my identity. It was a little bit of a rough spot, and I also feel really grateful because I do think a lot of the changes in terms of how I think about collaboration and how I think about work are going to benefit me and a really good in a long-term way. And I also feel like it does open up the door to talk to other artists about these things, and the fact that this is it's an experience that I'm having right now, but it is an experience that if we're all continue to be artists will affect us in certain ways throughout our lives as our limitations change. And I think that's helpful. Thank you.
She's the host.
Okay. Suzanne, there's also a question from Anna. Love the review of doilies. Have you looked at knitted doilies too? Is a half circle shawl sometimes a large doily?
The only knitted doilies that I know of that I've run across in Texas are the ones I knitted, or the ones I collected from eBay and other places. Knitting was just not as popular, I think, in Texas as crochet for whatever reason. I had to limit myself to doilies and not half shawl doilies because there's just so much out there to choose from, and you need to, if you're going to focus, you need to keep it focused. Well, if you're going to focus, you have to cut things out. And one of the guidelines I used was the definition of a doily from the Texas State Fair, which has doily competitions. And the largest doily that you can enter is a 24 inches in diameter.
Okay, another question for Emily. How will this collaboration with Leo affect future collaborations with other, perhaps grown-up artists?
Good question. Maybe I'll be a little bit more chill about them. I think, yeah, maybe going into it more with intention of, is this a genuine collaboration, or do I have an agenda that I'm trying to create with someone else? So being clear about that, what that might mean for me. Thanks.
Okay, and for Suzanne, did you find examples of doilies among communities of color in the same area? From Nora Howley.
I did not find any doilies from communities of colors, in part because I live in a part of Texas that doesn't have very many people of color in it.
Could you repeat the beginning part of your answer, Suzanne? You were kind of quiet in the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did I say? I can't remember. Oh, and I didn't, in my word of mouth search for people and in my social media and so on, search for doilies, I didn't find any doilies among people of color. And the area I covered in my doilies trip to study the Panhandle is in a part of Texas where there really aren't large communities of color.
Thank you. And then just a couple more comments from people. I have a few knitted doilies here in Nebraska that I've collected. I judge knit and crochet at fairs and have never come across knitted doilies to judge. Claudia also comments, crochet seems to be more popular in hotter climates around the world, and that may be why knitted doilies aren't really a thing. And probably makes sense for most of Texas since it's usually a warm climate. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, we can wrap up, I guess, a little early then. And thank you so much, Emily and Suzanne, for your time and for sharing your creative work and your historical investigations. This was really fun to think about families and heritage, and also creating future heritage. So I hope everyone has a great afternoon. And if you do want to stick around, we do have a few more minutes if anyone wants to put anything in the chat.
Thanks so much. It's really fun. Thanks, everyone.